Chapter 70, SR-38 Hate. The following day, everyone was once more gathered around the map table just after breakfast, ready and eager to hear more of the story from Samus and Spike. When the pair entered, however, everyone noticed just how morose they both looked. "Is everything alright?" Twilight asked worriedly. "You look rather down." "We just remembered what the next two missions were, is all," Spike replied sadly. "They aren't very pleasant to remember." "Does anyone mind if I skim through the next one?" Samus asked bluntly. "It's not really all that interesting, and it went by rather fast. And to be perfectly honest, it's one I'd rather not remember in too much detail if I can help it." As Everpony present glanced back and forth between them in confusion, Gandraden nodded in understanding. "SR-388?" she asked idly. "The first time, yeah," Samus replied. Gore and Rundus immediately nodded understanding. "I'm afraid I don't follow," Discord spoke up. "No matter how necessary or justified it may be, no one likes remembering being party to a genocide," Rundus stated bluntly. Dead silence greeted that statement. Fluttershy was the first to speak up. "Gee, genocide?" she whimpered. "It was the next mission we were given," Spike stated bluntly. "Metroids were deemed too dangerous to all other forms of life to be allowed to continue to exist in their current form. So it was decided that they were to be exterminated. The Federation was planning a full-scale military objective to the Metroid homeworld, SR-388. However, they did invite any interested bounty hunter to attempt the extermination first, with a rather large bounty offered for success. But you said earlier that the Chozo designed the Metroids." Twilight spoke up. "They were designed for a purpose, weren't they? Wouldn't destroying them?" "Unfortunately," Samus interrupted, "those details weren't discovered until much later, and I paid the price for that." She glanced off into the distance. "Another part of the reason I don't particularly like remembering the next couple of missions." Silence reigned over the table as the ponies glanced at each other, silently discussing the point. Eventually, Sweetie spoke up. "So, what did SR-388 Metroids taste like, Spike?" she asked innocently. Samus and Spike both stared at her for a time, and then burst into laughter. "Unfortunately, I didn't get to taste any of them," Spike explained. "Except the standard adult forms after freezing them. Then I could break off chunks to eat, and they tasted like blueberry snow cones like that. The other forms of Metroid on SR-388 had higher resistance to cold due to the environment," Samus explained. "Cold-based weaponry, such as my Ice Beam or Spike's Ice Breath, could damage them, but not freeze them solid. Not only that, said environment required completely retweaking the functions of my power suit to deal with, meaning that most of my upgrades from other worlds were unavailable. All I had going in was my missile launcher, power beam, and basic power suit. Thankfully, the Chozo had left behind quite a few upgrades behind that did function in the new environment." "So what was this SR-3 place like, anyway?" Applejack asked. "Sounds pretty interesting." "Unpleasant, to say the least," Spike explained. "The planet itself was constantly shifting, as were the cave systems the Metroids lived in. Water, acid, and lava levels rose and fell, pathways changed, and non-Metroid life signs varied. The most frightening part was that it seemed to happen in response to the deaths of the Metroids we were hunting, as though the planet itself were alive and fighting us." Luna glanced at the terrified expressions on the faces of the other equine listeners. "Samus, before night falls, I want a full list of all your suit upgrades and functionality. If I'm going to be fighting Metroids in Everpony's dreams tonight, I want to be properly equipped." "Will do, Luna," Samus agreed, chuckling a bit. "So, you mentioned types of Metroids other than the adult stage," Rainbow asked quickly, taking notes. "What were they? What did they look like? And how did you fight them?" Spike chuckled as he let his mind reach back. "Well, my own hunting instincts let us track them down," he explained. "The most common Metroid variation we encountered was the Alpha Metroid. This was the second stage of Metroid evolution, where the Metroid has developed a durable exoskeleton that is resistant to weapons fire. The gripping fangs point forward for ramming, and it develops eyes in addition to whatever other means of sensing its environment it possesses. While it was more durable than the adult, Samus added, the underbelly was still vulnerable to missile fire, or punching and biting. But they moved too fast for me to land too many bites, Spike explained. So I didn't really get a chance to taste. The gammas were the next stage, Samus continued. We frequently saw alphas evolving into gammas, becoming more durable, sprouting more fangs, and gaining the ability to discharge electrical energy for defense. Still had the vulnerable underbelly, though, Spike explained. So the strategy was more or less the same. The Zetas were more interesting. They had arms, legs, a tail, and could shoot fire from their mouths. It was like fighting a miniature dragon. Especially since shedding the exoskeleton of the gammas left them more vulnerable to weapons, Samus added. The Omegas were much the same, except more durable and bigger. Fighting the Omegas was like fighting Ridley again, to a certain extent, Spike admitted. Tough, but fun. What was the gravity there like? Celestia asked. If it was so easy for you. 30 grams, Samus explained. A bit tough for me, easy for Spike after the pirate homeworld. Spike and Samus both fell silent for a time. The last Metroid we killed was the Queen, Spike stated at last. The one that laid the eggs so other Metroids could hatch. That was a tougher battle, Samus explained. Not only were all the abilities of an Omega cranked up, it kept its underbelly flat to the ground so we couldn't shoot it, and its neck was long enough to attack us without lifting its body. At first I clashed with it in bulk, Spike explained. But it was tough. I couldn't manage to damage it. Eventually, I found a way to kill it, Samus concluded. I let it eat me. Rainbow's pin dropped. Seriously? Yup, Samus replied. Once inside, I just laid morph ball bombs until it took too much damage and its body crumbled. She took a slow breath. And, then there was the last egg. And the infant Metroid inside. I was this close to killing it, to complete the mission. If I had, it would have doomed the universe. But Spike stopped me. Why did you, Spike? Rarity asked curiously. While the mission was distasteful, I don't see why you wouldn't want to complete it. Spike looked away. Because, for some reason, when that last Metroid hatched, I was able to understand it. As the infant Metroid came out of its egg, Samus lifted her arm cannon, ready to finish the job. As it floated around her, she readied her ice beam. Spike watched the Metroid, his own ice breath ready. But as it orbited around Samus, his ear flaps twitched. He could almost hear something, just out of range. Focusing, he tried to make sense. Mama? Gasping, he pushed Samus' arm cannon up, to not be aimed at the Metroid. Spike, what? Spike focused his senses on the Metroid, trying to make sense of what he had heard. Mama? Brother? The infant began orbiting around him as well, obviously confused. And yet, somehow, it had imprinted on Samus, and seemed to think he was a more mature Metroid, possibly an Omega, with Samus as his queen. Mom, he thinks you're his mother. Samus stared at the tiny gelatinous creature, not a threat to anyone or anything. It let out a tiny, adorable sounding scream, seeming to be awaiting instructions. She lowered her arm cannon, and disengaged it. Holding out her hand, she let the infant hover over her hand. Reaching out, she broke off some of the biomatter hanging from the walls and held it out. The infant ate from her hand. So we took him with us, Samus stated softly. A decision that changed the fate of the universe.